100 days from the midterm elections, and for a while now, it's often felt like one party has worked at just a grand and a granular level, both to short-circuit majority rule. There's dark money, mega donors, there's extreme gerrymandering, there is these sweeping power grabs. And if you want to understand how we got here, an easy place to start is actually back in 2010. People often remember the 2010 red wave on a federal level when Republicans flipped the House of Representatives and they gained 63 states that year. But maybe even more consequential was Republicans' down ballot dominance. They flipped 20 state legislative chambers across the country that year. And perhaps nowhere suffered more political whiplash than Wisconsin. It went from a Democratic trifecta. In Wisconsin, both legislative chambers and the governorship flipped to a Republican one. And what followed was a blueprint for modern authoritarianism on the state level. We saw a systematic effort to gerrymander electoral maps, and they eviscerated working class unions there, and they locked in far-right control through the courts as well. Republicans in Wisconsin and across the country had realized the fundamental truth that national Democrats, ignored for decades. Power is built from the bottom up, by just absolutely relentlessly competing in overlooked and low-profile elections, from school boards and county clerks to state legislative districts. Conservatives were able to manipulate American democracy's levers of power to get more power for themselves and to lock Democrats out of the process. For nearly a decade, Wisconsin looked like the canary in the coal mine. And yet, something else happened there. The people fought back. People like Ben Wickler, who spent 6 years as Wisconsin's Democratic Party chair, and there he helped build a year-round organizing machine, competing in every single contest, working to take the system back piece by piece. And you know what? It worked. There is now a liberal majority on the state Supreme Court, and the Republican gerrymandered map has been tossed out. And now, as the nation grapples with the second Trump term and unprecedented centralization of power, and as the Republican Party incessantly attacks free and fair elections, Wickler argues in his new book that Wisconsin's lesson is a prescription for the whole country. In it, he writes this: "The secret at the heart of this book, at the heart of American politics, is that the number of votes separating a future of crisis, unraveling, and tyranny from a future of democracy, opportunity, and freedom is agonizingly small. So small, in fact, that you and the other readers of this book have the power to change it." Political organizer and strategist Ben Wickler joins me now. As mentioned, his new book, This is the Plan: How to End America's Meltdown and Save Democracy, is out right now, and it is heating up the charts. Ben, it's good to see you.
Great to see you, Jacob. Thanks for having me on.
Let me read one more short passage from your book. You write, quote, "Trump's power to inflict horrors on particular populations or to rig and override elections in targeted areas depends in large part on who serves in local office. Meanwhile, local officials make critical decisions both on policy generally and on election administration specifically that can doom or revive the prospects of American democracy writ large." That all, it seems obvious, but how did Democrats lose sight of those bottom of the ballot races? And what does doing what you did, a year-round strategy to win them back, actually look like in practice?
Well, Jacob, I don't know if you've noticed this, but sometimes Democrats, and I count myself as a proud Democrat, can have shiny object syndrome. We can get distracted by the latest thing in the news. And Trump likes to manufacture shiny objects all the time. So we have a situation where we wake up, we turn on a TV or our phones, and we're so hammered with terrible things going wrong that we want to curl up in the fetal position and maybe not get out from under the covers. But the reality is that the work of building up at a community level, working to elect school board members, mayors, city council members, and then state legislators, state judges like Supreme Courts, that stuff never makes the headlines, but determines almost everything that happens upstream in American politics. In Wisconsin, we built team by team, neighborhood by neighborhood, friend by friend, a year-round organizing machine. And we communicate everywhere. We make sure there are folks posting in their group chats to make sure that folks actually vote in these local elections that write the rules for where ballot boxes are located and whether people can cast a ballot successfully. That winds up shaping the upstream consequences for the whole country. And that's all on the line this November.
I don't know actually how how good I am at it in my job, but I have tried to be as empathetic as possible in this job because it is crucial for the job of reporting. Across my whole career, really, it has been, an aspiration. And you really emphasize that in organizing and campaigning as well in your book, and I want to read a little bit of that too. You write, quote, "When you meet someone who isn't sure how they're going to vote or even whether they are going to vote, start by reminding yourself you have no idea what's happening in this person's life. They might be caring for a newborn or a dying parent. They might be writing the great American novel. You have no idea. Whatever you might assume, it is probably wrong." It's so true. In this job, I think about all the time how we meet people on their worst day. We are literally showing up at their door at a time when they probably don't want to talk to anybody, much less somebody like me with a stick microphone. And in national political messaging, it often feels like a lecture, somebody showing up and yelling at you about why you should care about something. And many people are understandably annoyed by that, cynical, tired of that. How does starting with genuine empathy, listening, actually change the math at the doorstep for any political party, actually?
Sure. So Wisconsin is a microcosm of the country. We over and over have elections that come down to 3 or 4 votes per precinct across the state. If you look at the whole country, Donald Trump won by 0.1% of the votes cast in the overall presidential election. If those votes had flipped in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, he wouldn't be in the White House. The Republican House majority is only there because of 7,309 votes. That's a tiny number. So how do you get those votes? You have to talk to people who, despite everything going on, they're not sure if they're going to vote or not, or they're not sure which side they're going to vote for, which means that they're not seeing the same things that you're seeing. They're not staying up at night worrying about the threat to democracy. They have other stuff going on. So it does start by actually asking questions. What is bothering people? The relationship of trust that you can build with people in your own community, or if you're somewhere where elections aren't close, chipping in, volunteering to support organizations, talking to the folks who are on the fence in the places where elections are on a knife's edge. It begins by finding out not what's on your mind, but what's on their mind. Right now, so many people across the political spectrum, people who voted for Trump last time, are screaming out that the basic cost of living is unaffordable. You'll hear that over and over again. But you cannot start with a preconception. You can't start by lecturing or imposing. You have to start by finding a shared value, a concern that someone has. That's a friend-to-friend process that, if we do it, can change everything.
It seems like such a no-brainer, but it is shocking to me how often politicians just have no grasp at all about, and reporters too, about what people's lives are actually like. And this one is an obvious, solution. And there are many of them in the book, long-term and short-term ideas and solutions. What do you say to voters, though, who are nervous about the upcoming midterms and the way that the president has threatened to interfere in it? Can this plan that this book is putting forward be applied in time?
Absolutely. And look, we should start by recognizing that we are in a moment of crisis. There's a reason why I put a fire extinguisher on the front of the book, because the country's on fire. And it is not enough to yell at people that Trump might try to steal the election. You have to ask, what are the levers of power that determine whether he can succeed? The most critical one is something that is in the Constitution itself. The Constitution dictates that states run the election, not the federal government. You can see Trump struggling against this, doing executive orders to try to seize control. He keeps losing in court because the language of the Constitution is plain, which means that the most critical thing we do this fall, certainly for Democrats, win the House, win the Senate majority, but also zero in on the offices that control how election administration itself functions. That means offices like the county recorders. That's the secretaries of state, attorneys general. In my state, Josh Kaul, attorney general, he reminds people before elections that intimidating a voter is a felony in my state. And that creates a measure of protection that, if we had a election denier in charge, Tom Tiffany running for governor, tried to overturn the 2020 election, we wouldn't have. So the 2028 election is on the line in the state and local races in 2026. And making sure you fill out that part of the ballot and you bring a group of friends to the polls and you do the organizing that actually turns folks out for races that get very little attention. That's the most powerful thing that each of us can do right now.
I also know that you've been spending a lot of time thinking about the 2024 nail-biter states, because you had this New York Times op-ed piece. And let me just read a little bit of what you wrote in that. In 2026, 7 of the closest states in the last presidential election, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, New Hampshire, and Minnesota, hold the potential to become Democratic trifectas. Are you still feeling that way 100 days out from the midterms?
Absolutely. This is, you just had Katie Hobbs on. Katie Hobbs in Arizona has a chance not only to win re-election, but also for both of her legislative chambers to become Democratic for the first time in more than half a century. When that happens, it unlocks the possibility of dictator-proofing states. One thing folks often forget is that as much as Trump abuses his pardon power for January 6 protesters, he cannot pardon people who are convicted of crimes at the state level, which means that if people try to mess with our elections in the states, and you have states that have passed laws to ensure that election interference is a serious crime, you have prosecutors who take democracy seriously, that creates a deterrent effect and a way to create accountability for people who try to strip away Americans' rights and freedoms. We really are in one of these moments you've seen around the world where a country can go either way, can collapse into authoritarianism, or there can be a resurgence of democracy. We've had moments like this in American history. It's not clear yet which way the country is going to go. But in these, especially these battleground states, the state legislative chambers will be determined often by a few hundred, even a few dozen votes in a couple places. I'm joining you today from La Crosse, Wisconsin, on the banks of the Mississippi. I'm near one of the closest state assembly districts in the state of Wisconsin that could tip the majority for the state assembly and determine who the next speaker of our state house is. That kind of race, so few people pay any attention at all that those who do have an enormous impact on the outcome. So this is an essential piece of the plan. Win at the state level, and then you can lock down democracy in those states. And by the way, sidestep the electoral college. There's a process to do that through state laws that I talk about in the book. There's a chance for us to unrig the American political system from the ground up.
Ben Wickler, a political organizer, strategist, and the author of the new book, This is the Plan, How to End America's Meltdown and Save Democracy. Go get it right now. Like I said, it's flying off the shelves, and it really is important reading at this critical moment in time. Ben, thanks.